I came home to find an official letter from the homeowner association taped to my front door, informing me that my house had been flagged for mandatory renovation due to non-compliance with neighborhood aesthetics. If I didn't make the required changes within 60 days, I'd be fined $30,000. I stared at the notice for a long moment, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an outright attack. My house was fine, better than fine. I'd spent thousands of dollars on renovations, carefully ensuring that every improvement met the so-called guidelines. But that didn't seem to matter. The homeowner association had decided my house was a problem, and that meant I was in for a fight. Stepping inside, I tossed the letter onto the counter and grabbed a beer from the fridge, trying to slow the rush of irritation creeping into my chest. I had dealt with their nonsense before, random citations, absurd lawn maintenance requirements, but this was different. A fine of this magnitude wasn't just a warning, it was a direct attempt to push me out. Before I could sit down, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before answering. "Hello. Henry, my friend, how are you?" The voice was smooth, overly familiar, like a salesman who had already decided I was going to buy something. I frowned. "Who is this?" "Apologies, I should have introduced myself. My name is Andrew. I represent a group of investors who are very interested in acquiring property in your neighborhood, and I just heard about the unfortunate situation with your house." I felt my stomach tighten. "How the hell did you hear about that? I just got the notice today." Andrew chuckled. "Oh, homeowner association records are public, and we like to stay informed. Look, I know this is unexpected, but I'd love to talk about a potential offer. Given the circumstances, we can make this easy for you." I gritted my teeth. "I'm not selling my house." Andrew sighed as if I were making his job unnecessarily difficult. "You might change your mind, Henry. 60 days isn't much time, and those fines add up quickly. But no pressure. If you reconsider, just give me a call." He hung up before I could respond. My grip on the phone tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a setup. I spent the rest of the evening digging through my files. I had every receipt, every email exchange, every approval from the homeowner association regarding my renovations. There was nothing in their guidelines that could justify this demand. I double-checked the compliance rules, but it was clear. I had done everything by the book. So why was I being targeted? By morning, I was already in my car, heading toward the homeowner association office. The building was as pristine as ever, its modern glass windows and perfectly manicured lawns exuding an artificial sense of order. The receptionist barely glanced up as I stepped inside. "Can I help you?" I placed the notice firmly on the counter. "I need to speak with someone about this." She skimmed the letter with practiced disinterest. "You'll need to schedule an appointment with the compliance committee. They meet once a month." I exhaled slowly, already anticipating the bureaucratic runaround. "When's the next meeting?" She tapped on her keyboard. "Let's see. The next available slot is in 9 weeks. 9 weeks! I clenched my jaw. That was past the deadline. "I need to talk to someone today. Sir, if you don't schedule an appointment, there's nothing we can do." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. "Then tell me why my house has suddenly been flagged for renovation when I have documentation proving it meets every single requirement." The receptionist hesitated, her professional smile flickering for just a moment before she recovered. "You'll have to take that up with the committee. I knew a dead end when I saw one." Fuming, I turned and strode toward the exit. As I stepped outside, something made me stop. Across the street, parked just beyond the office, sat a black sedan with tinted windows. A familiar unease crawled up my spine. That same car had been idling near my house the night before. I took a step toward it, but before I could get a better look, the driver pulled away. I felt the weight of suspicion settle deep in my chest. This wasn't just homeowner association harassment. This was something more. I spent the next few hours driving around the neighborhood, checking in with a few of my neighbors, but most of them seemed uneasy, unwilling to talk. A couple of them muttered about not wanting trouble before hurrying back inside. It was clear I was on my own in this, but I wasn't about to back down. I stopped by the local courthouse trying to see if I could file a complaint or get a legal injunction to stall their demands, but the clerk just shook his head, telling me these disputes were internal neighborhood matters. That was exactly what the homeowner association wanted: absolute control with no oversight. That night, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing my paperwork for the 100th time when I noticed something I had overlooked before. The signature at the bottom of my compliance approval form, the one confirming my renovations met guidelines, was missing. I knew it had been there. I had seen it. But now it was gone. Someone had altered the records. A chill ran through me. Someone was erasing my legal defenses one by one, and I had no idea how far they were willing to go to force me out. I barely slept that night, my mind racing through every possible scenario. The missing signature on my compliance approval form wasn't just an oversight. Someone had deliberately removed it, erasing the evidence that my house met all the homeowner association's requirements. That meant I was dealing with more than just bureaucratic incompetence. This was intentional, targeted. Someone wanted my house, and they were willing to manipulate records to make it happen, and that someone wasn't acting alone. By morning, I had a new plan. If the homeowner association wouldn't meet with me, I'd make them notice me. I drove straight to their office, this time not bothering with the receptionist. I walked past her desk and pushed open the door to the main conference room, where several members of the board sat in a meeting. They all turned to look at me, surprised, some irritated. Karen, the homeowner association treasurer, leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. "Henry, you can't just barge in here," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "We have procedures. You need to schedule an appointment." "Funny how those appointments are booked for 9 weeks out," I shot back, tossing the fraudulent notice onto the table. "Someone erased my compliance approval. I have the original copy, and this isn't a clerical error. So, who's responsible?" The board members exchanged glances. One of them, an older man with graying hair, cleared his throat. "I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding. We'll be happy to review the documents and get back to you." "No," I snapped. "I want answers now, because last night I found out someone's been watching my house, and then there's the little detail of an investor calling me the same day I got this notice, offering to buy my home before I even had time to process it. Coincidence? I don't think so." Karen gave me a sickly, sweet smile. "Henry, if you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe you should consider their offer. Moving can be a fresh start." My fingers curled into fists. "I'm not moving, and you have no right to make these demands when I have proof my house was in compliance. So I suggest you take a long, hard look at your records and fix whatever mistake this is before I take legal action." Her smile faltered for just a second, but then she let out a dramatic sigh. "Fine. We'll review the records, but you'll need to be patient." I didn't trust her for a second, but I'd made my presence known. That was a start. I left the office feeling only slightly better, but as I stepped outside, that same black sedan from yesterday was parked across the street. The moment I made eye contact with the driver's dark sunglasses, the car pulled away. Enough was enough. If they were going to watch me, I was going to watch back. That evening, I set up a camera facing my front yard. If they were tracking my every move, I wanted proof. The feeling of paranoia sat heavy on my chest, but I wasn't about to let them intimidate me. Around midnight, I heard a noise, a rustling sound near my driveway. I moved quickly to my window and peered out, heart pounding. A figure was standing near my mailbox. I could barely make out the shape, but I saw them slip something inside before hurrying off. I ran outside, grabbing the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in bold black ink: "Sell before it's too late." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just a pushy investor, this was a warning. I took the letter inside and examined it under the kitchen light. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, as if someone had taken their time crafting this message. I flipped the envelope over, hoping for some identifying mark, but it was blank. My stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't some scare tactic from a disgruntled neighbor. This was an organized effort to push me out. I barely sat down before I heard another sound outside. The snap of a twig, the low hum of an engine idling nearby. I crept back to the window and peered through the blinds. The black sedan had returned, parked just far enough away to avoid suspicion. My fists tightened as I realized they weren't just watching. They were waiting. I reached for my phone and dialed the non-emergency police number. The operator answered in a flat, bored tone. "City, Police Department. What's your emergency?" I took a breath. I think someone is harassing me. There's a car parked outside my house every night, and tonight someone left a threatening message in my mailbox. "Can you describe the vehicle?" "Black sedan, tinted windows. I don't have a plate number, but I've seen it multiple times." The operator sighed. "Unless they've committed a crime or directly threatened you, there's not much we can do. If they step onto your property, call us back." I clenched my jaw. "So, you're telling me I have to wait until something happens? I understand your frustration, sir, but we can't send an officer for a parked car. If you feel unsafe, consider installing additional security measures." I hung up, resisting the urge to throw my phone across the room. It was clear I was on my own, but I wasn't about to roll over and let them force me out. I spent the rest of the night watching the car, waiting for it to move. Eventually, just before dawn, it pulled away, disappearing into the quiet streets. My exhaustion was bone deep, but my resolve was stronger. They wanted me out. They were escalating, and I had no intention of backing down. The next morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on me, but my determination was stronger than ever. If they thought they could intimidate me into leaving, they were sorely mistaken. The black sedan, the erased records, the threats, it was all orchestrated, and I needed to find out who was behind it before they took their next step. I started my day by checking the footage from the security camera I had set up the night before. My hands tensed as I watched the grainy playback. The figure approaching my mailbox was cloaked in dark clothing, moving swiftly, deliberately. Their face was obscured, but what struck me most was their confidence. They weren't sneaking around like a common vandal. They were carrying out a task, as if they had done it a dozen times before. I rewound the footage, watching the way they moved. They had parked further down the street out of the camera's view and walked up under the cover of darkness. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the screen. Maybe it wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was a start. I spent the next hour making calls, trying to find an attorney who specialized in property disputes and homeowner association conflicts. Most of them either didn't want to take the case or flat out told me I was fighting a losing battle. That only fueled my frustration. I wasn't going to be bullied into giving up my home. Just as I was about to give up, I finally got a lead. A lawyer named Linda Kramer agreed to meet with me that afternoon. She had experience dealing with corrupt homeowner associations and seemed genuinely interested in hearing my case. When I arrived at her office, she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Mr. Carson, I've seen cases like yours before. These people operate like a well-oiled machine, and they're banking on you not having the resources to fight back." I leaned forward, sliding the letter and my altered records across the desk. They erased my compliance approval and slapped me with a massive fine. And now, someone's watching my house and leaving threats in my mailbox. This isn't just a legal issue. They want me gone. Linda scanned the documents, her brow furrowing. "This looks deliberate. If they're erasing records, there has to be a trail. The question is, who's benefiting from this?" An investor named Andrew called me the same day I got the notice. He knew about it before I even opened the letter. She exhaled sharply. "That's not a coincidence. Investors don't just hover around waiting for an opportunity like this unless they're being fed information from the inside." I felt my stomach twist. "So what do we do?" Linda leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. "First, we file a legal injunction to prevent them from taking further action against you. That'll buy us some time. Next, we start digging. Financial records, past property disputes, anything that ties this investor to the homeowner association." I nodded, feeling the first real spark of hope since this nightmare began. And what about the surveillance, the threats? Linda hesitated. That's trickier. The police won't do much unless you can prove a direct threat, and right now, all we have is circumstantial evidence. But if they escalate, we'll document everything and use it against them. I left her office with a plan, but also with the realization that this fight was far from over. That night, I sat in my living room watching the footage again and again, my mind racing. I needed more than a legal battle. I needed proof. If I could catch them in the act, I could expose them. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 2:47 a.m., a figure approached my house again. This time, they weren't just dropping a letter. They were scoping out the property, moving slowly, deliberately, shining a small flashlight along my fence. I grabbed my phone, snapping pictures from the window. My heart pounded as I realized something chilling. This wasn't just some random enforcer. They knew exactly what they were looking for. And that meant whatever they were planning next was much bigger than a few threats. The next day, I woke up feeling like I had barely slept. The footage from the night before played over and over in my mind. Whoever was behind this wasn't backing down. They weren't just trying to intimidate me. They were actively searching for something, and I needed to figure out what it was before they made their next move. I spent the morning compiling everything I had. Screenshots from my security footage, copies of the altered compliance approval, and every letter the homeowner association had sent me. The problem was, none of it was enough to prove criminal intent. It was just enough to show a pattern of harassment. But patterns alone wouldn't win this fight. I needed something concrete. I decided to start with the one person who might have answers, Andrew. He was the investor who called me the moment my house was flagged, the one who somehow had inside knowledge of my situation before I did. If anyone could give me a lead, it was him. I dialed the number he had called from and waited. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Henry, my friend, I was wondering when you'd call. Have you come to your senses?" I gritted my teeth. "Cut the act, Andrew. I know this isn't just a routine real estate deal. You knew about my house before I did, and I want to know how." There was a pause. Then a low chuckle. Henry, why does it matter? The reality is, you're in a situation that's only going to get worse. You're fighting a battle you can't win. I'm offering you a way out. Who's feeding you information? The homeowner association? Karen? Someone else? Does it really matter? Look, I like you. That's why I'm giving you a chance to walk away with something. But if you push too hard, well, let's just say things could become very unpleasant. My stomach twisted. This was more than a business deal, it was a coordinated effort to force me out. But why? I wasn't about to let this slide. I needed leverage, something that could force Andrew or the homeowner association into a mistake. I spent the next few hours digging into Andrew's background. Real estate records, business filings, anything that could link him to Karen or the homeowner association. It took time, but I finally found something. A shell company, registered to a holding firm that had purchased 3 other homes in my neighborhood under similar circumstances. Each of those homeowners had been hit with unexpected homeowner association violations, and within 6 months, their properties were sold at a fraction of their value. I printed everything out and sent it to Linda. Within minutes, she called me. "Henry, this is exactly what we need. This proves they have a pattern of targeting specific homeowners. We can use this in court." I exhaled, feeling a small sense of victory. "So, what's our next move?" "We go public. If we bring this to the media, we can put pressure on the homeowner association before they can cover their tracks. But that means they'll push back harder. Are you ready for that?" I thought about it. About the late-night surveillance, the intimidation tactics, the way Karen smirked at me like I was already defeated. I've come this far. I'm not stopping now. That night, I installed 2 more security cameras and reinforced my locks. If they wanted to come after me, they'd have to do it in plain sight. I wasn't going to make it easy for them. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. A motion alert from my camera. I opened the app and felt my blood run cold. A figure stood at my front porch, not trying to hide this time. They stared straight into the camera, face covered by a dark hoodie. Then, slowly, deliberately, They lifted a can of red spray paint and scrawled something across my door. I waited until they were gone before stepping outside to read the message. Get out, final warning. The war had officially begun. I stood there for a long moment, letting the weight of those words settle. I was being pushed into a corner, but they had made a mistake, giving me more reason to fight back. I took photos, documented everything, and sent them to Linda. Her response was immediate. This is serious. If they've escalated to direct threats, they're getting desperate. We need to act fast. I spent the next day gathering more evidence, talking to neighbors in hopes that someone else had experienced the same thing. Most were hesitant, clearly afraid of getting involved. But one, an elderly man named Roger, invited me inside. They did the same thing to my friend 3 streets over, he said, voice low. He fought it for months, and then one day he just left. House sold, no explanation. It was like he disappeared. Chills ran down my spine. Do you have any idea what pushed him over the edge? Roger hesitated. There were break-ins. Things went missing, but nothing valuable. Just enough to make him feel unsafe. He told me he felt watched. I clenched my fists. They weren't just using legal pressure. They were resorting to psychological warfare. I left Roger's house with a growing sense of urgency. They had done this before, and they were prepared to do it again. That night, I sat in the dark, watching my security feeds, waiting. If they came back, I was going to catch them in the act, and this time, I'd be ready. I barely slept that night, my body on high alert for any sound, any movement. The message on my door was still fresh in my mind, the bold red paint seared into my thoughts like a brand. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were escalating, and I knew that if I didn't make my next move carefully, I could end up like Roger's friend. Gone without a trace, another victim of the homeowner association's silent war. At sunrise, I called Linda. I need this out in the open. Today. She didn't hesitate. I've already reached out to a few journalists who specialize in exposing housing scams. If we can get enough media attention, they won't be able to cover this up. But Henry, you need to be ready. If they've already threatened you, this will only make them more desperate. I was beyond caring. Let them come. I'm done hiding. The next few hours were a blur of interviews and document scans. Linda had prepared a detailed case, showing the pattern of fraudulent violations, the intimidation tactics, and the real estate transfers that followed. The moment one of the journalists published the first article online, my phone started buzzing non-stop. Neighbors who had been too afraid to speak up were now reaching out, sharing their own horror stories. It was bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just about my house. It was a systemic effort to force out homeowners and turn properties over to investors at a fraction of their worth. By mid-afternoon, local news channels were covering the story. A crew even showed up outside my house, filming the vandalized door and interviewing me on the sidewalk. If Karen and her people thought they could keep this quiet, they had badly miscalculated. But I knew it wouldn't be that easy. That night, I reinforced my security system and double-checked the locks. My cameras were recording everything, and I had a backup battery in case they tried to cut the power. I sat by the window, watching the street, waiting. Every few minutes, my mind replayed the stories from the other homeowners who had been forced out. What had they done to Roger's friend to make him leave? How far were they willing to go? At exactly 2:56 a.m., the black sedan returned. But this time, it didn't just idle at a distance, it pulled into my driveway. My pulse pounded as I grabbed my phone and hit record. The driver's door opened and a figure stepped out, dressed in black, their face obscured by a hood. I watched as they moved to my porch, glancing around cautiously before taking something from their pocket. A crowbar. I didn't wait. I threw the door open, my voice cutting through the silence. "Step away from my house. I'm calling the police." The figure froze, then turned sharply, sprinting back toward the car. I ran after them, my adrenaline drowning out every rational thought. Just as they reached the sedan, I saw their face for the first time. Karen. She looked at me with wild desperation before diving into the car. The tires screeched against the pavement as she sped away, vanishing into the night. I stood there, breathless, my heart hammering. This wasn't just corruption, this was criminal, and I had caught her in the act. By the time the police arrived, I had the footage saved, copies sent to Linda and the journalists. There was no way they could sweep this under the rug now. By morning, the entire city was talking about it. Karen resigned from the homeowner association before charges were even filed, but it was too late to save her reputation. The association itself faced an audit, and multiple lawsuits from other homeowners started piling up. The black sedan never returned. But it wasn't over yet. Even as I stood on my porch, looking at the house I had fought so hard to keep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There were others, bigger players behind the scenes, people who had orchestrated this system long before Karen got involved. She had been a pawn, a willing participant, but not the mastermind. And if I stopped now, they would just replace her with someone else. A week later, Linda called me with an update. "Henry, I've been digging through financial records, and you were right. Karen wasn't working alone. There's a company behind this, and they've been buying up homes all across the county. Every single one of them was flagged by a homeowner association first." I clenched my jaw. "So, we keep going. We take this higher." She sighed. "This is going to be a long fight. You sure you're ready for that?" I thought about everything that had happened. About the late-night threats, the intimidation, the fear. Then I looked at my house, my home. "I'm not just ready," I said. "I'm just getting started." The war wasn't over. And this time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every homeowner who had been forced out, for every person who had been silenced. I had won the battle, but the real war was just beginning.